The small scout ship shook hard as red beams of light cut through the darkness of space. Jake Martinez gripped his seat as alarms screamed all around him. His ship was hit bad and falling fast toward the green moon below. Smoke filled the cabin, and sparks flew from broken screens. "Come on, stay together," Jake said to his dying ship. He tried to control the fall, but the engines were gone. All he could do was aim for the thick forest that covered most of the moon's surface. Maybe the trees would slow him down enough to live through this. The ship hit the treetops hard. Branches snapped and broke as the metal hull tore through them. Jake felt his body slam against the safety straps as the ship bounced and rolled. Then everything went dark. When Jake woke up, his head hurt and blood ran down his face. The ship was on its side, wedged between two big trees. Smoke poured from the engine room, and small fires burned in different places. He had to get out fast. Before the whole thing exploded, Jake unbuckled his straps and fell to what used to be the wall. His body hurt all over, but nothing felt broken. He grabbed his survival pack from under his seat and checked what was inside. A first aid kit, some food bars, water bottles, a knife, and rope. His pistol was still in its holder on his belt. The radio was cracked, but might still work. He crawled through the broken door and got away from the ship just as small explosions started inside. The wreck would burn for hours and make a lot of smoke. Any enemy ships would see it from space and come to check. Jake looked around at where he had crashed. Tall trees grew everywhere, and thick green plants covered the ground. The air smelled like wet earth and growing things. This moon had good air to breathe and seemed safe for humans. But he was not alone here. Through the trees, Jake saw a bright flash in the sky. A sleek ship was coming down fast, much different from his boxy scout ship. This one was smooth and silver, with no sharp edges anywhere. It landed in a clearing, about half a mile away from the crash site. Jake pulled out his broken radio and tried to call for help. Static filled his ears, but he could hear bits of voices speaking in a strange language. The aliens were talking to each other, and they sounded excited. They had found him. 4 tall figures walked out of the silver ship. Even from far away, Jake could see they were not human. They moved in a smooth way, like they were floating just above the ground. Their skin looked gray and rough, like old leather. They wore dark clothes that seemed to change color as they moved. The leader pointed toward Jake's burning ship and made clicking sounds. The others nodded and started pulling out equipment. Jake had never seen anything like their tools. They had long metal sticks that hummed with power and small flying machines that rose into the air by themselves. One of the aliens held up a square device and looked at it like a screen. Lights blinked on it as it moved back and forth. Jake realized it was some kind of scanner, probably looking for life signs. His heart beat faster as he understood what was happening. These aliens were hunters, and he was their prey. The flying machines spread out over the forest, moving in perfect patterns. They made no sound as they flew, but Jake could see red lights scanning the ground below them. More lights appeared on the aliens' equipment as they picked up his trail. Jake knew he had to move. These creatures had technology far beyond anything humans had built. Their scanners could probably find him anywhere he tried to hide. Caves, thick bushes, even underground would not help him. He needed to think of something they would not expect. He looked around the forest for ideas. The trees were tall and thick, but climbing them would just make him easier to spot from above. There were some rocks, but not big enough to hide behind. Then he saw the small river that ran through the trees about 100 feet away. The water was dark and muddy, flowing slowly between muddy banks. Jake remembered his grandfather's stories about the war in Vietnam, how soldiers would cover themselves with mud to hide from enemies. His grandfather had said that sometimes the old ways work better than new ones. Jake made his choice. Instead of running deeper into the forest like the aliens expected, he headed straight for the muddy river. The alien scanners would be looking for a human trying to hide in normal places. They would not expect him to get dirty and use the earth itself. As protection. As he reached the riverbank, Jake could hear the aliens moving through the forest behind him. They were not being quiet about it. Their equipment made soft humming sounds, and they talked to each other in their clicking language. They were confident their technology would find him quickly. Jake looked back through the trees and saw the red scanning lights getting closer. The flying machines were covering the area in a grid pattern, checking every bush and tree. In a few minutes, they would reach the river and find him. He had to act fast. Jake pulled off his jacket and boots, then stepped into the cold, muddy water. The river bottom was soft and squishy under his feet. He scooped up handfuls of the thick mud and started covering his arms and face with it. The mud was cold and felt gross on his skin, but Jake kept spreading it everywhere. He covered his hair, his clothes, even his hands and neck. The dark mud would hide his heat from their scanners and make him look like part of the riverbank. Through the trees, Jake saw the aliens stop and look at their equipment. The leader made angry, clicking sounds and shook his scanner. The others gathered around, looking confused. Their perfect technology was starting to give them strange readings. Jake smiled as he covered himself with more mud. His grandfather had been right. Sometimes the simplest ideas work the best. These aliens had probably never seen anyone use mud as camouflage. To them, it was just dirt. They would never think it could defeat their advanced scanners. The red lights from the flying machines passed over the river, but they did not stop. Jake held his breath as one of them flew right over his head. The scanner beam hit him, but the mud made his body temperature match the river around him. To the machine, he was just another muddy rock. Jake watched the aliens spread out to search other areas. They were sure their equipment was working right, and that he had gone deeper into the forest. They never thought to look carefully at the muddy riverbank where a human soldier sat perfectly still, covered in earth and grinning in the darkness. The hunt had begun, but Jake Martinez had just turned the rules upside down. Jake stayed in the muddy water for 2 hours, watching the aliens search the forest. Their flying machines kept coming back to the same areas, scanning over and over. The aliens themselves walked in straight lines, looking at their screens instead of using their eyes to see what was around them. When the red lights moved far enough away, Jake slowly got out of the river. The mud had dried on his skin and clothes, making him look like a walking piece of the riverbank. He felt heavy and moved carefully, so the dried mud would not crack and fall off. Jake knew he needed better camouflage if he wanted to stay hidden. The mud was good, but it would not last long. He looked around the forest for things he could use. There were many different plants growing everywhere, long grasses, leafy bushes, and hanging vines. His grandfather had taught him about making ghillie suits when he was young. Jake remembered sitting in the old man's garage, watching him weave grass and leaves into special nets that made soldiers invisible. His grandfather had said that nature was the best teacher for hiding. Jake found a thick bush with long, thin leaves that moved in the wind. He cut off several branches with his knife and stuck them into his belt and the straps of his pack. Then he found some dark green moss growing on tree trunks and rubbed it into his muddy clothes. The work was slow and careful. Jake had to think about what colors and shapes would help him blend in. The forest had many shades of green and brown, with patches of gray rocks and dark shadows. He needed to match all of these to become invisible. From his position by the river, Jake could see the alien silver ship in the clearing. More aliens had come out of it, and they were setting up bigger equipment. Tall metal poles with spinning dishes on top rose into the air. Cables ran between different machines, and bright lights flashed on control panels. Jake pulled out his broken radio and managed to pick up some of their talk. Even though he did not understand their language, he could tell they were getting upset. The clicking sounds came faster and louder. Sometimes one of them would hit a machine or wave their arms around. The aliens' equipment was too good, and that was their problem. Their scanners could detect a human heartbeat from 2 miles away, but they could not tell the difference between Jake and the small animals that lived in the forest. The mud and plants were breaking up his heat signature and making him look like many different warm spots instead of one human. Jake decided to test his camouflage. He slowly moved away from the river, staying low and using the natural cover of bushes and fallen logs. Every few steps, he stopped and listened. The aliens' machines made constant humming sounds, and he could hear them talking to each other. Of the flying machines came back toward the river. Jake pressed himself against a large tree and stayed perfectly still. The machine hovered just 20 feet away, its red scanner beam sweeping back and forth. The light passed right over Jake 3 times, but the machine did not react. After a few minutes, it flew away to search somewhere else. Jake grinned under his mask of mud and leaves. His camouflage was working better than he had hoped. The aliens. Technology was designed to find enemies who used the same kind of advanced equipment they did. They had never faced someone who fought with mud and sticks. As the day went on, Jake learned more about how the aliens hunted. They moved in precise patterns, always staying in formation. They trusted their machines completely and never looked around with their own eyes. When their scanners said nothing was there, they believed it without question. Jake also noticed that the aliens did not understand the forest. They walked through mud that would show their footprints for hours. They broke branches and left obvious trails wherever they went. They made noise constantly and did not seem to know that animals would run away from them, making the forest go quiet. The aliens had another big problem. They could not tell the difference between different types of heat signatures. When Jake moved slowly, his body temperature matched the warm ground around him. When he stayed still, he became as cool as the shadows. Their scanners saw him as part of the forest, not as a human hiding in it. Jake started to move in a wide circle around the aliens' camp. He wanted to see all of their equipment and count how many enemies he was facing. The thick mud and plant camouflage let him get much closer than should have been possible. From behind a fallen log, Jake watched the aliens work. There were 6 of them now, all focused on their machines. They had set up a command post with screens and communication gear. One alien stood in the center, clearly the leader, pointing at different displays and giving orders. Jake could see that their main scanner was a big dish that slowly turned in circles. Every time it pointed toward him, lights flashed on a screen. But the lights were scattered and weak, not the strong signal they were looking for. The aliens kept adjusting their equipment, trying to get a clear reading. The leader alien made loud clicking sounds and pointed at the scanner. 2 others came over and started working on it with tools. Jake realized they thought their machine was broken. The idea that a human could hide from their technology using mud and plants was impossible for them to understand. Jake decided to have some fun with them. He moved to a new position about 50 feet away, going very slowly so his heat signature would not change suddenly. The alien scanner picked up the movement, and they all got excited. They pointed toward Jake's old hiding spot and sent 2 flying machines to check it out. When the machines found nothing, the aliens became even more confused. They ran more tests on their equipment and argued with each other. Jake could hear the frustration in their voices, even though he did not understand their words. As the sun began to set, Jake felt more confident about his chances. The aliens were completely dependent on their technology, and that technology could not see him. He had turned their greatest strength into their biggest weakness. Jake found a good spot to spend the night, a small cave under some tree roots, hidden by thick bushes. He added more mud and fresh plants to his camouflage, making sure he would stay invisible even if the aliens brought out different types of scanners. From his hiding place, Jake watched the aliens set up lights around their camp. They were going to keep searching through the night, but they were looking for the wrong thing. They expected to find a human using human technology. Instead, they were hunting a ghost made of mud and leaves who had learned to be part of the forest itself. Jake settled in for a long night, planning his next moves. The aliens thought they were the hunters, but Jake was starting to think differently. Maybe it was time to turn the tables on them. Jake woke up before dawn, still covered in dried mud and plants. He had slept in the small cave under the tree roots, and his body was stiff from staying in one position all night. But his camouflage had worked perfectly. The aliens' lights had swept over his hiding spot many times, but they never saw him. Through the bush, Jake could see the aliens' camp. They had worked all night, and now there were more machines than before. Tall metal towers reached up into the sky, covered with spinning dishes and blinking lights. Cables ran everywhere, connecting different pieces of equipment. The aliens had called for help. Jake listened to his broken radio and heard new voices speaking in the clicking language. The sounds were angrier now, and he could hear frustration even without understanding the words. The aliens were having problems with their hunt, and their bosses were not happy about it. The leader alien stood in the center of the camp, pointing at different screens and making loud clicking sounds. Jake could see that all the displays showed confused patterns of lights and colors. The alien scanners were picking up dozens of signals, but none of them made sense. Two new aliens walked out of the silver ship. They were taller than the others and wore different clothes with bright symbols on them. Jake guessed they were experts who had come to fix the broken equipment. They carried new tools and immediately started working on the big scanner. Jake watched them take apart their machines and put them back together. They ran test after test, checking every part and connection. But the equipment was not broken. It was working exactly as it was supposed to work. The problem was that it had never been designed to find a human covered in mud and plants. The expert aliens brought out a new type of scanner, one that Jake had never seen before. It was smaller than the others, but seemed more powerful. When they turned it on, the machine made a high whining sound that hurt Jake's ears even from far away. Jake pressed himself deeper into his hiding spot as the new scanner swept the forest. The beam was different from the others. It moved slower and seemed to look deeper into things. For a moment, Jake worried that this machine might be able to see through his camouflage. But after an hour of scanning, the expert aliens started making the same frustrated clicking sounds as the others. Their new equipment was giving them the same confusing results. Lights flashed all over their screens, but they could not tell which signals were important. Jake smiled under his mask of mud and leaves. The aliens' problem was not their equipment. It was their way of thinking. They had built machines that could find any enemy who used technology like theirs. But they had never imagined fighting someone who used the oldest tricks in the book. As the morning went on, Jake decided to move to a new position. He wanted to get closer to the aliens' ship and see what other equipment they had. Moving during daylight was dangerous, but his camouflage had worked so well that he felt confident. Jake crawled very slowly through the thick bushes, stopping every few feet to listen and watch. The aliens were so focused on their machines that they never looked around with their own eyes. They walked right past good hiding spots without seeing them. It took Jake 2 hours to move just 200 feet, but he made it to a fallen tree that gave him a perfect view of the aliens' camp. From here, he could see everything they were doing and hear most of their conversations through his Broken radio. The leader alien was talking to someone on a communication device. Even without understanding the language, Jake could tell the conversation was not going well. The leader's voice got higher and faster, and the clicking sounds became sharp and angry. Watched the leader point at the scanner displays and make gestures with his arms. The leader was trying to explain why his expert hunting team could not find one human soldier. Jake could imagine how that conversation was going. The boss on the other end probably did not believe what he was hearing. After the communication ended, the leader alien threw his device on the ground and made very loud clicking sounds. The other aliens stepped back and looked scared. Jake realized that the leader was in serious trouble with his superiors. The expert aliens worked even harder on their equipment, bringing out tools that Jake had never seen before. They took apart the main scanner completely and rebuilt it with new parts. When they turned it on, it made different sounds and showed different patterns on its screen, but the results were the same. The scanner still picked up dozens of confusing signals that led nowhere. The aliens sent their flying machines to check every signal, but they only found small animals, warm rocks, and patches of sun-heated ground. Jake decided to have some more fun with them. He very carefully moved to a new position, going so slowly that his heat signature barely changed. The movement was just enough to create a new signal on the alien screens. The aliens got excited and sent 3 flying machines to check Jake's old hiding spot. When they found nothing, the expert aliens started arguing with each other. Jake could hear their voices getting louder and more frustrated. One of the expert aliens pulled out a device that looked like a medical scanner. He pointed it at the other aliens and then at their equipment. Jake realized the alien was checking to see if there was something wrong with their senses or their machines. The test showed that everything was working normally. The aliens' senses were fine, and their equipment was perfect. But they still could not find the human they were hunting. Jake could see the confusion and fear growing in their movements. The leader alien made a decision. He called all the others together and pointed toward different parts of the forest. They were going to split up and search on foot, using their portable scanners to check every tree and bush. Jake watched the aliens form into 3 groups of 2. Each group had different equipment and was assigned to search a different area. They moved out in straight lines, checking their scanners every few steps. This was exactly what Jake had hoped for. When the aliens stayed together, they were strong and hard to fool. But when they split up, they became vulnerable. Jake could watch them and learn their patterns without being seen. The first group walked right past Jake's hiding spot, just 20 feet away. Their scanner beeped and flashed, picking up his heat signature mixed with the warm ground and plants around him. But the reading was so confused that they could not tell where it was coming from. Jake held his breath as one of the aliens stopped and looked around. For a moment, their eyes met through the leaves. But the alien only saw muddy ground and forest plants. The idea that a human could be hiding right in front of him, covered in mud and vegetation, never entered his mind. The alien checked his scanner again, shook his head, and moved on. Jake almost laughed out loud. These hunters were so dependent on their technology that they had forgotten how to use their own senses. As the day went on, Jake watched all 3 groups make the same mistakes. They walked past perfect hiding spots without seeing them. They ignored obvious signs like broken branches and footprints. They made noise that scared away all the forest animals, making the woods go quiet around them. Jake realized that the aliens had never learned to hunt without their machines. On their homeworld, they probably did not need to. Their technology was so advanced that it could find anything. But here, fighting against mud and plants, their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. The sun was starting to set when Jake heard new sounds from the aliens' camp. More ships were coming down from space, and they were much bigger than the first one. Jake counted at least 3 new vessels landing in the clearing. Dozens of new aliens came out of the ships, all carrying different types of equipment. Jake had never seen some of these machines before. They were bringing in their best hunters and their most advanced technology. But Jake was not worried. He had learned something important about these aliens. They could not think outside of their technology. They could not imagine that the oldest and simplest methods might work better than their advanced machines. As darkness fell, Jake prepared for the next phase of his survival. The aliens were about to learn that sometimes the most primitive tactics are the most effective ones. Jake watched from his muddy hiding spot as more aliens poured out of the new ships. There were at least 20 of them now, all carrying different types of scanners and weapons. They set up a much bigger camp with tall lights that turned night into day. The forest around their landing site looked like a small city made of metal and blinking lights. The new aliens were different from the first hunting team. They moved faster and seemed more serious about their work. Their equipment was bigger and made louder humming sounds. Jake could see that they had brought their best hunters to find him, but Jake was not scared. He had spent 2 days watching these aliens, and he understood how they thought. They believed that better technology would solve their problem. They could not imagine that a human with mud and plants could beat their most advanced machines. Jake decided it was time to stop just hiding and start fighting back. He had learned the aliens' patterns and weaknesses. Now he would use that knowledge to turn their hunt into his game. The first thing Jake did was study the new equipment. The aliens had brought scanners that looked different from the ones before. Some were mounted on tall poles, others were carried by hand, and a few were built into small vehicles that rolled around on wheels. Jake listened to his broken radio and heard the aliens talking to each other. Their voices sounded more confident now. The new team leader was making plans and giving orders. Jake could tell they thought their problems were over, but Jake had a plan of his own. He had noticed that the alien scanners worked by detecting heat and movement. If he could create false heat sources in different places, he could send the aliens running around the forest, chasing nothing. Jake found what he needed near the river. The water had washed smooth rocks onto the shore, and some of them were perfect for his plan. He collected a dozen rocks that were about the size of his fist and carried them back to his hiding spot. During the day, Jake placed the rocks in sunny spots where they would get very hot. As the sun went down, he carefully moved the warm rocks to different locations around the forest. Each rock gave off heat that looked like a small animal or a piece of equipment on the alien scanners. The aliens' new equipment immediately picked up the heat signatures from Jake's rocks. Lights flashed on their screens, and they got excited. Finally, their scanners were finding clear signals, instead of the confusing mess they had been seeing. Jake watched 3 teams of aliens head out to check the signals. They moved quickly and quietly, thinking they were closing in on their prey. Each team was armed with powerful weapons and advanced scanners. The first team reached one of Jake's rocks and stood around it looking confused. Their scanner said there was a heat source right in front of them, but all they could see was a warm rock sitting on the ground. They spent 20 minutes checking the area before giving up. The second team had the same experience. They found Jake's rock exactly where their scanner said it would be, but they could not understand why a rock would create such a strong signal. They called back to their base and reported a technical problem with their equipment. Jake almost laughed as he watched the third team. They were so sure their scanner was right that they kept looking around the rock, thinking Jake must be hiding nearby. They searched every bush and tree in the area, never realizing that the rock itself was their target. After 2 hours of chasing Jake's decoy rocks, the aliens returned to their camp, angry and confused. Their new equipment was giving them clear signals, but every signal led to nothing useful. The team leaders started arguing with each other, and Jake could hear their frustration through his radio. Jake decided to make things worse for them. He waited until the aliens settled down for the night, then he moved all his rocks to new locations. The next morning, the aliens would find new heat signatures in completely different places, but Jake was not finished. He had noticed that the aliens' flying machines landed on the ground to recharge their power. They sat quietly in clearings around the forest, looking like sleeping metal birds. Jake had an idea for dealing with them. Jake found a muddy spot near one of the recharging stations and gathered handfuls of thick, sticky mud. He waited until the middle of the night when the aliens were not watching their machines. Then he crept close to one of the flying devices. The machine was about the size of a small car, with smooth metal skin and several sensor ports on its sides. Jake very carefully covered all the sensor ports with mud, making sure to pack it in tight so it would not fall off easily. When the machine tried to fly the next morning, its sensors could not see anything. It rose into the air and immediately started spinning in circles, confused by the lack of information from its eyes. The aliens watching from their camp made loud clicking sounds as their expensive machine crashed into a tree. Jake was so pleased with his success that he decided to try the same trick on other machines. Over the next few hours, he managed to cover the sensors on 2 more flying devices with mud and vegetation. The aliens became frantic when their machines started failing. They brought out new equipment to test the disabled devices, but they could not understand what was wrong. The machines worked perfectly until they tried to use their sensors. Then they became helpless and crashed. One of the expert aliens made a discovery that excited the whole team. He found mud in the sensor ports of a crashed machine and held it up for the others to see. The aliens gathered around and examined the mud carefully. Jake watched them through his broken radio as they talked about the mud. They were trying to figure out how it had gotten into their machine. Some thought it was an accident. Others believed it was some kind of natural phenomenon. None of them considered that a human might have put it there on purpose, that the aliens decided to clean their machines and put guards around them. But Jake had already learned what he needed to know. Their technology was vulnerable to the simplest attacks. Mud and plants could stop their most advanced equipment. Jake spent the next day moving around the forest, always staying just ahead of the alien search teams. He left more heated rocks in different places and covered more machines with mud when he got the chance. Each success made the aliens more confused and frustrated. The aliens brought out new types of scanners, but they all had the same problem. They were designed to find high-tech enemies, not humans who fought with mud and sticks. Jake's primitive tactics confused every piece of equipment they used. By the end of the 3rd day, the aliens were arguing constantly. Jake could hear their voices getting louder and angrier through his radio. They had brought their best hunters and their most advanced technology, but they were losing to a single human who had nothing but mud and plants. Jake realized that he had completely changed the nature of the hunt. The aliens had come here thinking they were the predators, and he was the prey. But now they were afraid to send out their machines because they might be attacked with mud. They were jumping at every false signal he created with his heated rocks. Aliens were no longer hunting Jake. They were trying to defend themselves against an enemy they could not understand. Jake had become the hunter, and they were his prey. As night fell, Jake made his final preparations. He had learned everything he needed to know about the aliens and their weaknesses. Tomorrow, he would put his knowledge to the ultimate test. He was going to steal their ship and escape from this moon. The aliens thought they were dealing with some kind of mysterious Earth technology. They had no idea that their greatest defeat was coming from a human armed with nothing but mud, rocks, and the wisdom of his grandfather's old war stories. Jake had been watching the aliens for 4 days now, and he knew their routines perfectly. Every morning, They sent out search teams in the same patterns. Every evening, they brought their flying machines back to the same recharging stations. And every night, they left their main ship guarded by only 2 aliens who spent most of their time looking at scanner screens. The ship was Jake's only way off this moon. His own crashed vessel was a burned wreck, and no human rescue ships knew where he was. If he wanted to get home, he would have to steal an alien ship and figure out how to fly it. Jake spent the morning adding fresh mud and plants to his camouflage. After 4 days of hiding in the forest, he had become a master of natural concealment. The dried mud on his skin was now layered with moss, leaves, and twigs. Small bugs had made homes in his makeshift ghillie suit, making him smell and look like part of the forest floor. The aliens had given up trying to find him with their scanners. Instead, they were packing up their equipment and preparing to leave. Jake could see the frustration in their movements as they loaded their failed machines back onto the ships. Through his broken radio, Jake heard the team leader talking to his superiors. Even without understanding the words, Jake could tell the conversation was going badly. The leader's voice was high and desperate, and the clicking sounds came very fast. The alien was trying to explain how his expert team had failed to catch one human. Jake smiled under his mask of mud and leaves. The aliens would go home and tell stories about the mysterious human who could not be found. They would never know that their greatest enemy had been a man covered in dirt, fighting with tricks his grandfather had learned 50 years ago. But Jake was not finished with them yet. He had one more surprise planned, and it would be the biggest shock of all. As the sun began to set, Jake made his way toward the aliens' main ship. He moved very slowly, using every piece of cover the forest offered. The ship sat in the middle of a cleared area, surrounded by lights and sensor equipment. 2 guards walked around it, carrying portable scanners and checking their readings every few minutes. Jake reached the edge of the clearing and stopped to study the ship. It was much bigger than his scout vessel, with smooth curves and no visible weapons. The entrance was a ramp that led up to an opening in the side. The guards walked past it every 10 minutes in their patrol. Jake waited for the right moment. When both guards were on the far side of the ship, he ran across the open ground and pressed himself against the metal hull. The ship's surface was warm and smooth, and Jake could feel it humming with power. He worked his way around to the entrance ramp and listened for sounds from inside. The ship seemed quiet, but Jake knew there might be more aliens inside. He would have to be very careful. When the guards were far enough away, Jake crept up the ramp and into the ship. The inside was nothing like human ships. Everything was curved and smooth, with no sharp corners anywhere. Soft lights glowed from the walls, and the floor felt warm under his feet. Jake found what looked like a cargo bay filled with boxes and equipment. He hid behind a stack of containers and listened for movement. The ship was quiet, except for the gentle hum of its engines. Most of the aliens were probably outside, working on their camp. Jake explored the ship carefully, staying in the shadows and moving very slowly. He found the main control room, where several aliens sat at strange curved consoles. Their backs were turned to him, and they were focused on their work. Jake also found sleeping quarters, storage rooms, and what looked like a kitchen. The ship was designed for long trips with a large crew. But right now, most of the aliens were outside, and only a few were inside the ship. Jake made his way to the cargo bay and found a hiding spot behind some large containers. From here, he could see the entrance ramp and hear what was happening outside. He would wait until the aliens were ready to leave, then reveal himself at the perfect moment. Hours passed as Jake waited in the dark cargo bay. He heard the aliens loading equipment and talking to each other. Their voices sounded tired and defeated. The great hunt had failed, and they were going home with nothing to show for it. Jake's broken radio crackled to life, and he heard a new voice speaking in the alien language. The sound was coming from the ship's communication system, and it was clearly important. All the aliens stopped what they were doing and listened. Jake could not understand the words, but he could hear the tone. The voice was angry and demanding. The aliens were being called back to their home world immediately. Their superiors were not happy about their failure. The alien leader's voice came through the radio, sounding scared and desperate. Jake could tell the leader was trying to explain what had happened, but the voice from space was not interested in excuses. The conversation ended abruptly, and Jake heard the leader make frustrated clicking sounds. Outside, the aliens began loading their equipment much faster. They were in a hurry to leave now, and they worked with urgent energy. Jake could hear them taking apart their base camp and carrying everything up the ramp. Jake pressed himself deeper into his hiding spot as aliens began bringing boxes and equipment into the cargo bay. They were so focused on their work that they never noticed the muddy figure hiding in the shadows just a few feet away. More aliens came into the cargo bay, carrying the last of their equipment. Jake could smell their strange scent, like metal and dry sand. They moved quickly and efficiently, but they seemed nervous. The failed hunt had shaken their confidence. Jake watched as they secured everything for flight. The containers around him were strapped down with cables, and safety lights began blinking on the walls. The ship was almost ready to leave. The entrance ramp slowly closed with a soft hissing sound. Jake felt the ship's engines change their pitch as they prepared for takeoff. In a few minutes, he would be flying through space in an alien vessel, still covered in mud and hidden among their cargo. The ship lifted off smoothly, with none of the shaking and noise that human ships made. Jake felt his weight change as they rose into the sky, but the movement was so gentle he could barely tell they were flying. Through the ship's hull, Jake could hear the aliens talking to each other. Their voices were quiet and subdued. The clicking sounds came slowly, like they were tired or sad. Jake realized that this failure would probably end their careers as hunters. Jake stayed hidden for several hours as the ship traveled through space. He could feel when they changed direction or speed, but everything was smooth and quiet. The aliens had technology that made space travel feel like riding in a luxury car. Finally, Jake heard new sounds from outside the cargo bay. Voices were talking in excited tones, and there was movement throughout the ship. Jake guessed they were approaching their destination, but then Jake's broken radio picked up something that made his heart race. Human voices were speaking in English, and they were close by. A human ship had found the alien vessel and was demanding to speak with whoever was in charge. Jake listened as the alien leader tried to communicate with the human ship. The alien's English was broken and hard to understand, but Jake could make out the basic meaning. The humans wanted to know what had happened to their missing scout pilot. Jake realized this was his chance. The humans had come looking for him, and they had found the alien ship. But they did not know he was inside it, hidden in the cargo bay like a piece of equipment. Jake made his decision. He stood up from his hiding spot and walked toward the cargo bay door. His mud and plant camouflage was still thick on his skin, and small bugs crawled out of his hair as he moved. He looked like a walking piece of the forest floor. The cargo bay door was locked, but Jake found a control panel nearby. The alien symbols meant nothing to him, but he pressed buttons until something happened. Warning lights began flashing, and the door slowly opened. Jake walked out of the cargo bay and into the main corridor of the ship. Aliens turned to look at him, and their eyes went wide with shock. They made high-pitched clicking sounds and backed away from the muddy figure that had appeared from their cargo hold. Jake smiled and raised his hands to show he was not armed. "Hello," he said in a calm voice. "I think you have been looking for me." The aliens stared at him in complete disbelief. Their leader came running from the control room. making frantic clicking sounds. When he saw Jake standing there, covered in mud and vegetation, his jaw dropped open. Jake could see the alien's mind trying to process what he was seeing. For 4 days, their most advanced technology had failed to find this human. They had brought in experts and equipment worth millions of credits, and now their prey was standing in their ship, having apparently been there all along. The alien leader pulled out a scanner and pointed it at Jake. The device immediately went crazy, showing readings that made no sense. Jake was registering as dozens of different heat sources, all mixed together in a confusing pattern. "Your machines work fine," Jake said to the confused alien. "They just were not designed to find someone covered in mud and plants." Jake walked past the stunned aliens toward the control room. Through the windows, he could see a human rescue ship floating nearby. The familiar shape of Earth technology looked beautiful after 4 days of hiding in the forest. The alien leader followed, Jake clicking frantically and waving his scanner around. Other aliens gathered behind them, all tall,